Hey guys, tonight let's peel back the layers of romantic fantasy and dive headfirst into a world that was pretty rank Victorian hygiene. The gilded age of elegant dress, big skirts, and enough hair grease to deep fry a whole goose from a novel. We're skipping the sanitized, lavender-scented scenes from period dramas. No, this evening we'll experience the true 1800s, where a warm soak was as rare as a dental expert with all their natural teeth, and every city block was one major downpour away from becoming an open-air soup of questionable ingredients. Before you get cozy, please like this clip and subscribe, but do it only if you genuinely enjoy the content here. Leave a quick comment letting me know where in the world you're viewing this and what the local time is. And tell us how many layers of spray deodorant you use to compensate for skipping a few days of showering. Now, dim the ceiling light, turn up your fan for some soothing white noise, and for maximum realism, maybe mist the air with an aroma of musty basement and a hint of soot. Then relax. Get as comfortable as possible. Just try not to wear a dozen layers of damp wool clothing. Wait, let's pause. Did folks truly bathe just once a month? Was antiperspirant even a thing, or did everyone simply endure the powerful scent? How long could a woman of good standing go without cleaning her hair before it morphed into a furry creature? Was the typical Londoner's morning routine simply focused on avoiding deep breaths? And what precisely did a Victorian toothbrush actually look like? Congrats! You've just arrived in 1854 London. The atmosphere is heavy with the familiar smog and another smell you absolutely don't want to identify. Your carafe of water has ice on top, your bedside receptacle is full, and your upstairs neighbour is already blasting Beethoven on a beat-up piano. Welcome to cleanliness, Victorian style. You drag yourself to your cracked ceramic wash basin. The water inside is as cold as the neighbour's morning scowl, and there's just enough liquid to barely drown an unusually stubborn insect. Your entire bath involves a fast, simple dab to your face and armpits with a cloth that might have been white at some point, followed by a silent plea that no one sits too close to you on the city bus. You stare into the murky water, considering your next move. You could splash your whole face, but the memory of last week's immediate brain freeze is still too vivid. You cautiously dip your fingers in and immediately recoil. Victorian water is always exactly 3 degrees colder than you expected. You wring out the cloth, give it a quick shake for good luck and wipe your cheeks, producing a streak that is technically moisture but could easily be mistaken for tears. That's it. Face, neck, and a quick pat on the armpits. Legs and feet? Let's not push it. Those are a weekend-only kind of privilege. Your mother always said that cleanliness is next to godliness, but here in the cold morning light, cleanliness seems about as far away as central heating. You notice the soapy scum clinging to the rim. Evidence that someone at some time attempted a proper wash. Maybe it was you last spring when you briefly felt optimistic about self-improvement. The only soap available is a sliver the size of a postage stamp, and it smells faintly of aged citrus and disappointment. You rub it between your palms, wishing it would multiply like the biblical food, but all you achieve is a mild stickiness that you optimistically label fresh. The mirror, if you happen to own one, reflects a version of you that looks just slightly less exhausted. You try to pull a comb through your hair. Victorian combs are legendary for 2 things: their ability to untangle knots and their ability to remove small, living creatures. You successfully achieve both. You absent-mindedly pull a small clump of fluff from your ear and study it, wondering if this indicates you should clean more often, or maybe less. At some point, your sibling barges in, demanding their turn, and you realise you've used up your daily water allowance. If you are wealthy, the morning ablution happens in a sunny dressing room with fresh water delivered by a humble maid, plus the gentle luxury of lavender-scented towels. If you're not, it's more likely a shared slosh of icy faucet water in the cramped corner of your rented single room. Some innovative Victorians keep their wash basin under their bed, which sounds smart until you recall what else is often under the bed. Sometimes the house cat drinks from it first. On the coldest days, the surface ice needs to be broken with a hairbrush handle before you can even begin. Still, you persist. The goal isn't perfection, it's plausible deniability. If somebody on the commuter train wrinkles their nose, you can always pin the blame on the man selling cabbages or the overall scent of the metropolis. In the background, your neighbour is already scrubbing something against a metal washboard, complaining about the cost of lye soap and the impossibility of ever feeling truly clean. You consider plunging your entire head, but the thought of going to work with icy sideburns stops you. Besides, who has time to explain that look to their boss? There's a rhythm to this morning routine, a soothing, if slightly frantic, choreography. Rinse, dab, sigh, repeat. The basin's contents will be thrown into the alley by noon, the damp rag will dry stiff on the window latch, and tomorrow you'll start all over. By now your hands are numb, your eyes are a little wider, and your courage, at least for the next couple of hours, is renewed. You might not smell like a fancy flower shop, but in a city of coal smoke, horse manure, and questionable sausages, you're doing the best you can. And in Victorian London, that's just about as clean as anyone gets. The main point. In an era obsessed with image, you've just completed the most crucial step in Victorian self-care, surviving the morning wash without getting frostbite, causing a public outcry, or accidentally watering the plants with your used basin water. And if you make it through the entire day without someone passing out in your proximity, you're basically a champion. Hair washing is a twice-a-year event because why risk pneumonia, or worse, the shame of wet hair in public? Most folks simply brush vigorously, add a thick application of hair product, and hope their fashionable hat can conceal both style and biology. Your morning starts with the familiar sound of a bristled brush scraping a scalp that is a blend of natural oils and an accidental plant nursery. The family comb, possibly inherited from a relative who succumbed to something you sincerely hope wasn't contagious, is passed from person to person. Victorian combs are less a grooming tool and more a personal endurance test. They're typically made of bone, horn, or whatever the local merchant could carve from a farm animal. You drag it through your hair, wincing at every tangle, each one a stark reminder that the last time your hair met water was during a different season. Today, you're not fighting alone. Across the room, your sister is dusting her hair roots with a fine powder that smells like violets and looks suspiciously like old baking flour. Hair powder is extremely popular, at least for those who can afford the luxury of masking dirt with a subtle floral scent and a cloud of hopeful wishes. The poorer population simply settles for a little coal dust or a discreet application of cornstarch, anything to eliminate the greasy shine and create the illusion of freshly washed hair. Now comes the main event, the pomade application. Victorian pomade recipes are secret family formulas passed down through the generations and improved only by complete chance. The primary component? Lard. Yes, actual rendered pig fat mixed with beeswax and whatever else is available that might distract from the stench. You scoop out a generous dollop, always more than you initially think you'll need, and smear it directly onto your scalp, effectively flattening stray hairs while instantly undoing any minor benefit the powder just provided. For a slight upgrade, you might add a sprinkle of rose water or a few drops of citrus oil, desperately hoping no one notices that the underlying scent is last week's dinner remnants. Your available hairstyles are restricted by circumstance, the local weather, and their need for structural strength. Women twist their hair into large, intricate buns held together with a dangerous collection of pins, small combs, and sheer willpower. Men, meanwhile, shape their sideburns and moustaches with a mixture of oil, saliva, and sometimes even candle wax. If it's a special occasion, the ideal look is neat, orderly, and, most importantly, covered. Hats aren't just a fashion statement, they're essential protective gear. A tall hat, a bonnet, or a worn newsboy cap isn't just for appearances. It's a shield against unexpected rain, airborne animal waste, and the ever-present threat of public embarrassment. Washing your hair, when you finally do it, is an ordeal. You schedule an entire day, boil several pots of water, and brace yourself. Victorian shampoos are a messy combination of eggs, liquor, vinegar, and soapwort, essentially a runny omelette with a questionable cleaning ability. You lather up, rinse with cold water, and then spend the next 3 hours drying, shaking, and praying your hair doesn't freeze into a solid helmet before it's completely dry. Catching a chill from wet hair is a source of genuine terror. Every cough you make afterward is met with the worried stare of someone who is very familiar with the local obituaries. For children, the process is even more chaotic. Parents attack tangles with a stiff brush, a severe reprimand, and perhaps a smear of goose fat. If lice appear, and they will, it's time for kerosene, vinegar, and the kind of aggressive combing that leaves behind emotional trauma. Victorian hair care is a mix of endless patience and silent prayer. But regardless of the effort, you step out into the world with your hair neatly styled, shining in its own unique way, and heavily perfumed. If a sudden breeze carries the faint smell of bacon or old pastry, simply smile. In Victorian London, that scent is probably you. And if you catch your reflection in a shop window and your hair moves as one solid mass, congratulations. You've achieved the era's highest standard. Not stylish, exactly, not entirely clean, but gloriously, stubbornly, and obviously Victorian. Once a week, if you are lucky, it's bath night, a ritual that requires dragging a large copper tub into the kitchen, constantly boiling kettles of water and navigating the complex rules of who gets to go first. It won't be you. The celebration begins with lots of crashing and heavy lifting, as the old bathtub, last used as a laundry basket and once as a temporary home for a scared goose, is wedged in front of the fireplace. The floorboards emit a ceremonial groan. They've survived generations of bad household decisions, but might not survive this one. The whole family mobilises. One person chops wood, another tends the fire, and the least fortunate are sent to haul bucket after bucket of ice-cold water from the pump, or if you live in the city and are brave, directly from the public faucet. Every single drop must be heated on the stove, which quickly turns the kitchen into a foggy, steamy sauna, subtly scented with boiled cabbage and the lingering smell of last week's stew. The water is poured in slowly, producing billows of steam and the kind of anticipation usually reserved for public entertainment. When the tub is finally ready, only half full because why waste resources, you step back and watch the family hierarchy unfold. The eldest or the main income earner enters first, sinking into the water like royalty into a lukewarm throne. There is a lot of sighing and splashing, a brief moment of actual cleanliness, and then their turn is over. No one stays long. Every passing minute means another degree of heat is lost and another layer of questionable material settles to the bottom. Then it's the children's turn, from oldest to youngest, because germs, like money, apparently trickle down. Each child emerges with their hair slicked down, slightly pinker than before, and smelling faintly of overcooked vegetables and a hint of shared soap. By the time it's finally your turn, the water has reached an opacity level usually found only in river dredging. Floating patches of lint and something that looks suspiciously like a partial sock swirl around your ankles. The temperature is barely warm, but tradition demands you smile and pretend to enjoy the experience, if only to avoid a tedious lecture about the importance of cleanliness. For the truly unlucky, bath night sometimes coincides with a surprise visit from extended relatives. Suddenly the queue is longer, the water cloudier, and your chances of getting anything remotely resembling a rinse are as slim as your patience. In some homes, the last bather is the family pet, who seems to enjoy the moment, perhaps out of spite. Soap is a precious commodity, and often rationed, so you're given a tiny sliver and warned not to waste it on your arms. The technique is fast. A quick scrub to the face, armpits, and any area that might be socially sniffed. Then an even faster rinse, before you start to notice exactly how cold the room has become. If you're fortunate, you get a coarse towel to dry off. If not, it's last week's shirt or a vigorous little dance near the fire, which is now just embers. Bath night is, more than anything else, a social gathering. Siblings shout insults from the side, parents give strict instructions about not lingering, and someone always manages to drop a bucket of fresh water at the worst possible time. The air is thick with steam, laughter, and the distinct awkwardness of family members trying very hard not to look directly at one another. Privacy is a distant hope. Your dignity is as wrinkled as your toes. By the end of the ordeal, you wrap yourself in whatever dry fabric is left, shuffle off to bed, and hope the coming week passes, slowly. The tub is removed. The remaining water is tossed onto the street, where it will freeze into a dangerous obstacle for tomorrow's pedestrians, and the family congratulates itself on surviving another round. You might not be gleaming, but you are definitely cleaner than you were yesterday, and in Victorian England that counts as a small miracle. Plus, you've learned a crucial life lesson. The real meaning of taking the plunge isn't about bravery. It's about accepting the fact that eventually everyone has to sit in someone else's dirty bath water. Dental care in the Victorian era means brushing with a brush that looks suspiciously like a shoe polisher dabbed with baking soda, or, if you're bold, a splash of human urine. Dentists are avoided like an actual plague, probably because they often resemble overzealous butchers. Your morning mouth cleaning routine begins with a brush made from the hair of some unfortunate animal fitted onto a handle carved from bone or wood. If you're middle class, perhaps it's ivory. If you're working class, it's likely just a rough cloth wrapped around a finger and a deep, sincere hope that your family's genetics are strong. Toothpaste exists, technically, but it's not the minty foam that makes your mouth tingle. Victorian paste is an odd concoction of soot, salt, chalk, or sometimes a hint of charcoal. If you're feeling fancy, a tiny bit of imported tooth powder. If you're being thrifty, ashes from last night's fire. Then comes the rinse. Water is fine for the elite, but a quick swish with vinegar, gin, or plain urine is, according to various home remedies, a guaranteed tooth whitener. The results are extremely questionable, and the taste is permanently unforgettable. If you are particularly unlucky, your family believes in the mystical power of rubbing your teeth with cuttlefish bone or a splash of lemon juice, or whatever the local paper claimed Queen Victoria might have tried once. None of these taste good. All of them are abrasive enough to be used as sandpaper. The main objective is to prevent the worst of the dirt, because the alternative is terrifying, a trip to the dentist. In Victorian England, dentist is a very loose term. The local barber surgeon, fresh from sharpening his shaving blades, performs double duty. His dental kit includes forceps, a hammer, and nerves of steel, or possibly just deafness. Anaesthetics are rare, and when they are administered, they're more for show than for actual pain relief. Nitrous oxide, laughing gas, is just starting to appear, but it's mostly a distraction from the fact that a man whose previous patient was a sheepdog is about to wrench your tooth out. If you complain of a toothache, your options are limited. Extraction is the preferred solution. Fillings exist, but the materials are dodgy. Molten lead, tin, gold foil. Basically anything metallic and readily available. No one is entirely sure if they're meant to stay in your mouth long term. The process is loud, often public, and done with zero compassion. Sometimes the tooth comes out perfectly. Sometimes you leave with a little extra piece of jawbone as a bonus. Afterward, you might rinse with alcohol or salt water, or just try not to speak for a week. Preventive care is, at best, experimental. There is a huge market for breath fresheners, small candies flavoured with licorice or cloves, which hide but do nothing to solve the real problem. Victorians consume a huge amount of sugar, especially as the empire imports more exotic treats, so tooth decay is widespread. Blackened teeth become so common among the wealthy that it almost functions as a status symbol. Poorer people, meanwhile, just chew their bread with their gums and try not to dwell on it. Occasionally someone will try to floss, usually with a sturdy piece of thread or the pointed tip of a bird quill. Sometimes a simple toothpick will do, or the corner of a playing card, or for the truly desperate, the jagged edge of a matchstick. These little innovations usually result in a scream, a dropped match, and a solemn promise never to try anything new again. But for most Victorians, dental care is less about achieving a brilliant smile and more about basic survival. If you can get through the day without a throbbing pain or a visible abscess, you're winning. Smiling is less a social nicety and more an act of sheer bravery. Kissing is reserved only for those you genuinely, deeply love. And even then, perhaps just a polite handshake. So as you finish your morning routine, spitting into a cracked basin and putting away your worn-out brush, remember, in Victorian London, every tooth you still possess is a small victory against time, sugar, and the constant threat of amateur dentistry. And if anyone ever asks why you never smile in old photographs, just show them your toothbrush. They'll understand immediately. For those who don't have a private tub, public baths are the solution. Step into a steam-filled building packed with every type of person and pay a penny to enjoy both cleanliness and the latest city gossip. The moment you walk in, you're hit with a wave of warm, moist air, scented with a potent mix of cheap soap, wet fabric, and general optimism. Public baths in Victorian England are busy, democratic places, one of the few settings where you might see a banker, a chimney sweep, and someone claiming to have met Charles Dickens all wrapped in towels and trying not to look at each other's dirty feet. The air is loud with the sound of water splashing, the bubbling of kettles, and the low chatter of people exchanging stories, complaints, and the latest rumour about Mrs. Abernathy's prize-winning bird. The layout is simple, but not private. A row of metal tubs lines the tiled floor, separated by little more than a thin curtain if you're lucky, or just a polite turning of the head if you're not. You pay your penny, claim a spot, and wait your turn as a thin attendant whose main job is to appear bored fills each tub with a mix of boiling and cold water. There's always the chance you'll get splashed by your neighbour, whose enthusiasm for scrubbing seems inversely related to their understanding of personal space. Bath time here is never just about washing, it's a social performance, a chance to show off your best lathering technique while providing a running commentary on the neighbourhood's latest drama. You scrub yourself with soap that smells faintly of tar and roses, trying to ignore the questionable liquid sloshing near your feet and the annoying draft coming from the doorway. Somewhere in the corner, a group of children are giggling over a shared bucket, their mother watching them closely to make sure no one drowns, or worse, steals her precious bar of soap. If you are naturally shy, the public bath is a significant challenge. Privacy is a theoretical concept, and the curtain you're given has more holes than a cheese grater. The man on your left is discussing his infected toenail in agonizing detail, while the one on your right is determined to wash every piece of clothing he owns, possibly including the hat on his head. A symphony of coughs, sneezes, and the occasional off-key whistling fills the humid air, punctuated by the sharp shriek of someone discovering exactly how cold the cold bucket really is. For women, the experience is a blend of social club and obstacle course. Ladies' hours mean catching up with friends, sharing hair maintenance tips, and, for the bolder among them, exchanging recipes for homemade remedies that promise to cure everything from age spots to a broken heart. The bath matron, part jail warden and part counsellor, makes her rounds with strict reminders about time limits, proper conduct, and not splashing the walls. Meanwhile, the younger girls shriek and play a running game while grandmothers gather in corners, soaking their tired feet and offering advice on husbands and appropriate underwear. And then there's the great equalizer, the shared soap and the communal towel, which is supposed to be washed after every use, but looks suspiciously like it's been circulating since the previous monarch's reign. The soap is worn down to a tiny sliver, the towel is rough and damp, and you tell yourself it's exfoliating. Still, everyone pretends not to notice because, ultimately, the point isn't to leave spotless, but simply to leave. When you finally step outside, hair dripping and skin tingling from the effort, you've achieved a unique kind of Victorian freshness. Not perfectly clean, but certainly more hydrated and, most importantly, completely up to date on everyone else's business. You head home with the vague feeling that you've survived not just a bath, but a minor trial by water, steam, and small talk. Your body might be cleaner, but your mind is now heavy with a week's worth of new gossip. And so the public bath remains the great social leveller, a place where dignity, privacy, and sometimes your last piece of soap are sacrificed for the brief, fleeting glory of being, if only for a few hours, the cleanest person on your street. There is no modern indoor plumbing. Instead, your most private moments happen in a ceramic pot that sits patiently beneath your bed, constantly radiating a certain threat. Emptying it is a job for the lowest-ranking member of the household, or, if no one is available, a person with a severely compromised sense of smell. Let's set the scene. It's 2 a.m, and nature calls. You blindly fumble for your slippers, being extremely careful not to kick the chamber pot and unleash last night's contents onto your only pair of socks. The room is cold, the floorboards make loud creaking noises, and the last thing you want is to step in something that shouldn't be there. Still, the alternative is a long, cold walk outside to the outdoor toilet through pitch-black alleyways or muddy yards in the company of rats, stray cats, and the occasional neighbour whose insomnia is matched only by their nosiness. So, you do what every reasonable Victorian person does. You reach for the chamber pot, pray the lid is secured, and hope that nobody else is awake to witness the delicate balancing act and sheer effort that is about to occur. Chamber pots come in various shapes and designs. Some are plain, some are decorated with cheerful flowers or even political cartoons. A little humour to make the task bearable. But their function is universal. For a brief uncomfortable moment, the pot becomes the absolute centrepiece of your domestic world. Daytime brings a different sort of challenge. The ritual of emptying. Nobody wants the job. The family cat watches you with what can only be described as amusement as you carefully lift the pot and tiptoe through the house doing your best impersonation of a bomb disposal expert. The stairs feel steeper, the hallway seems endless, and every little bump is a test of your willpower. If you're a servant, this is a defining moment of your morning. If you're not, you quickly develop a strong sense of emotional detachment. The official rule is to empty the contents into the backyard privy or a designated cesspit, but shortcuts are very common. Some tenants in tall buildings simply open the window and let gravity handle the task, shouting a polite warning, "Gardez-l'eau," watch out for the water, to warn the unlucky people below. This French phrase is used even though water is rarely the main ingredient. This custom ensures that walking down certain alleys is an extreme sport, requiring both speed and luck. Cleaning the chamber pot is an exercise in stoicism. Soap and water are your best allies, although some people swear by a splash of vinegar or a quick rinse with hot ashes. No matter what you do, there's always a faint odour, an olfactory reminder that stubbornly clings to the ceramic and occasionally to you. In wealthier homes, more complex systems are developed, decorated commodes, fitted, secure lids, and servants whose sole purpose is to ensure you never have to face the evidence of your own biology. In poorer homes, a single pot might be shared between several people, raising the stakes and lowering the general air quality. For children, the chamber pot is both a confusing object and a rite of passage. Toddlers proudly graduate from makeshift potties to the family pot, while older siblings perfect the art of denial, "That's not mine," and avoidance, "I'll do it after breakfast, I promise." In the depths of winter, a cold chamber pot is a uniquely bracing experience. One that sharpens the senses and inspires the kind of immediate efficiency rarely seen outside of genuine emergencies. Yet, despite its inherent unpleasantness, the chamber pot is an essential part of Victorian life. It is the silent, smelly guardian beneath the bed, the unsung hero of late-night emergencies and lazy Sunday mornings. It teaches humility, patience, and the critical importance of keeping your shoes on at all times. The chamber pot is a stark reminder that history's greatest innovations are often born from daily indignity. And if you are lucky enough to avoid a spill, a slip, or the sheer horror of being the last person to empty it, you've already won the quietest, most crucial victory of your day. At daybreak, armies of night soil men quietly patrol the streets, collecting the contents of last night's chamber pots in large wheeled carts. They are paid very little, respected even less, but are absolutely essential for keeping the city from completely collapsing under its own filth. The workday for a night soil man starts before anyone else is awake. While respectable Victorians are still dreaming of fine dinners and the empire, these men are already at work. Shovels in hand, boots caked in mud, and a look of grim determination in their eyes. Their clothes are whatever garments managed to survive the previous week's stains and splashes. Gloves are a luxury for the rich. The night soil man's only real protection is his experience and a profound sense of resignation. Their task is simple, though unenviable. Go from door to door, alley to alley, collecting the contents of every chamber pot, outhouse, and cesspit in the area. Armed with a long-handled scoop and a battered lantern, they trudge from dwelling to dwelling, dumping pots, barrels, and sometimes entire homemade outhouses into their waiting carts. Each cart is a rolling monument to human biology and digestive struggles, a cacophony of smells and sights best left entirely to your imagination. The job is as much about precise timing as it is about physical bravery. Arrive too early and you're met with protests from half-asleep tenants. Arrive too late and the sun begins to rise, bringing with it both the heat and the entire city's collective disgust. For the night soil man, discretion is key. Moving through dark, shadowy back lanes, they avoid the main thoroughfares, working as quietly as possible. Nobody wants to witness the daily removal of last night's mistakes. Out of sight, out of mind, and preferably out of smelling range. Yet everyone knows when the night soil men have been through. They leave behind slightly cleaner streets, a faint scent that lingers like a bad memory, and the small but comforting knowledge that you will not, in fact, step out your front door into a river of yesterday's waste. It is an unglamorous job, but it is an absolutely necessary one. Without them, the city would completely stop functioning within days, overwhelmed by its own waste. Disease, already a constant danger, would spread uncontrollably. The night soil men keep the city just barely operational. Their route is both a marathon and an obstacle course. They navigate slick cobblestones in winter, ankle-deep mud in spring, and in the heat of summer, a stench so powerful that even the local rats hold their noses. The city's true geography is mapped in their minds, not by famous landmarks, but by the quality and quantity of each household's daily contributions. Some families leave generous tips, a token of appreciation for a job no one else would touch. Most offer only averted eyes and a mumbled excuse for the state of affairs. At the end of the route, the collected waste is hauled to the edge of the city, where it is either buried, dumped into large pits, or, if the city is feeling entrepreneurial, sold as fertilizer to nearby farms. In this way, the cycle of Victorian life continues. What leaves the chamber pot might eventually return in the form of next season's vegetables. It's not particularly poetic, but it is undoubtedly efficient. Socially, the night soil men occupy a strange position. Children point and stare, adults quickly cross the street. The men themselves are resigned to the fact that their job is a necessary evil in a world obsessed with maintaining appearances. Theirs is a job that everyone relies on and no one wants to discuss. They are invisible except for those brief moments when invisibility is simply impossible. However, despite the thankless nature of their labour, night soil men harbour a curious professional pride. Their occupation is grueling, hazardous, and sometimes utterly demoralising. Yet, the city's operation utterly depends on them. They are the unheralded support system of urban sanitation. Are they heroes or nuisances? It really just depends on the prevailing opinion. Therefore, when you conjure an image of Victorian London, look past the elegant ballrooms and the soft glow of the gaslights. Reserve a moment for the individuals silently trudging through the darkness, hauling away the metropolis's refuse, guaranteeing a dawn where you can walk the streets without having to wade through them. If that's not heroism, what is? Washing clothes represents an ordeal spanning multiple days. You lug weighty buckets, scrub intensely with harsh lye soap, and pray your underthings aren't flapping on the line for the neighbours to see, a stark flag of surrender. You earn extra points if any garment manages to survive the process intact. It starts long before the sun rises because if you have any ambition of having your shirts dry by nightfall, you need to outpace both the Daystar and every other resident on your block. You track down every filthy sock, undergarment and tea-stained hanky that was stuffed under beds, crammed into corners, or worn well past the point of being presentable. The laundry basket is never quite big enough. The family's best clothes get meticulous attention. The everyday work shirts, though, are treated like root vegetables, roughly scrubbed, beaten down, and, you hope, not mistakenly consumed. Water, in a world without indoor plumbing, is a taxing, precious resource. You haul heavy buckets to the nearest pump or well, fighting fierce winds, cold mist, and the distinct feeling that every nearby bird is secretly laughing at your struggle. The buckets make their way back, sloshing half their contents onto your footwear, which ironically are now the cleanest things you possess. If luck is on your side, a fire is blazing under a massive copper kettle, soon filling the air with the smell of boiling cloth and rapidly diminishing patience. Soap, too, is a whole situation. Lye soap is the norm, inexpensive, brutal, and capable of taking the hide off a rhinoceros if you're careless. It's a concoction of caustic soda and animal fat, arriving in massive, rigid blocks. You shave slices off, dissolve them in steaming water, and trust the resulting concoction won't eat through the basin. If you're really desperate, you run out midway and substitute with sand, ashes, or, on a truly frantic morning, a handful of leftover soap shavings from last year. The main event is the scrubbing. Victorian laundry is less about gentle cleaning and more about raw, physical force. You attack each piece with a washboard, which is every bit as uncomfortable as it sounds, and you rub, twist and pound the material until your knuckles are bleeding and your arms feel like overcooked linguine. Stains get a preliminary treatment of extra soap, vinegar, or the universal secret weapon, boiling water and blind hope. Every household has its unique fix. Some people swear by scrubbing stains with potato, others prefer kerosene, and a few, with a burst of unfounded optimism, try lemon juice, though the lemons typically end up in a gin and tonic. Rinsing follows. If you're fortunate, you have a second tub. If not, you dump the soapy sludge and refill, your fingers cold, red, and numb from the fresh pump water. Your hands are so shriveled they resemble preserved walnuts, and the only thing motivating you is the dream of clean linen, and possibly seeing your own reflection in a shirt, a wish that, frankly, is never fulfilled. Finally, the great hanging. The roof or yard turns into a chaotic field of flapping nightgowns, shirts, and socks that wave like white flags of surrender. You quickly secure each item, praying the wind doesn't rip them off and send your underpants plummeting into the neighbour's flower bed. There's nothing like chasing your drawers down a crowded street filled with amused onlookers. Then you wait. In winter, drying is an all-day affair, sometimes leaving the clothes as frozen, sculptural representations of your exhaustion. In the summer, it's a desperate race against sudden showers, dust clouds, and the neighbour's cat, who possesses a sixth sense for clean fabric. Once everything is dry, or at least dryish, you gather it all up, wonder about the origin of the odd mystery sock, and face the final test: ironing. The iron is a heavy cast iron monster, heated on the stove and wielded like a weapon. You scorch as many pieces as you successfully smooth, and by the finish your muscles are shaking and your resolve is entirely spent. Laundry day isn't just a tedious chore, it's a profound test of endurance. When it's finally over, you collapse into bed, inhaling the harsh yet strangely comforting scent of lie and failure. You may not look completely spotless, but for a short time at least your bloomers are clean. And in Victorian England, that's an accomplishment worthy of a victory banner, even if it's just a proud old undershirt waving gently in the breeze. Victorians wore so many undergarments they could have upholstered a fainting couch. The catch? They were rarely washed. Most people simply rotate through a few sets, letting yesterday's pair air out by draping them over a chair and pretending that constitutes cleanliness. The first step in any respectable Victorian's morning routine is squeezing into what feels like a full set of curtains. Long linen drawers, heavy woolen stockings, a chemise, an undershirt, and, for the particularly ambitious, maybe 2 corsets. Men wrestle into long johns or union suits, which offer about as much support as a soft hug from a sandpaper-covered octopus. Women add layer upon layer, chemise, petticoat, another petticoat, a clothing lasagna, all in the name of propriety, modesty, and preventing anyone from catching a scandalous glimpse of an ankle and passing out cold. Naturally, these items were not designed for comfort. The linen scratches, the wool irritates, and the combined sensation is like living inside a mildly aggressive hedge. But Victorians aren't the type to complain, at least not in public. Instead, you accept the daily ritual of adjusting, fastening, and tucking, hoping you won't need to make any quick moves or, perish the thought, have to run to catch a carriage. Corsets and stays are laced and pulled with fierce dedication, cinching the waist into shapes more often associated with wasps or overly ambitious sand timers. The procedure requires time, fortitude, and the aid of someone with powerful hands and a loose grip on personal space. The purpose of all these layers goes beyond simple modesty. It's also about hygiene. At least that's the theoretical premise. The idea is this: if your expensive outer clothes stay clean, nobody cares what's happening underneath. Your underthings absorb the entire day's dust, sweat, and existential worry, allowing your suit or dress to go for another week or even a month without a full wash. Consequently, underwear is worn, aired, and then worn again in a relentless cycle of "that'll do." When a set begins to feel particularly pungent, you hang it over a chair near the window, praying a strong current of air will achieve what soap and water never will. Laundry day, when it finally rolls around, is a day of reckoning. Underwear is scrubbed, boiled, and then publicly displayed for the entire neighbourhood. Nothing screams social standing like a line of flapping bloomers. Children chase rogue undergarments with the zeal of foxhounds on a hunt. Embarrassment is guaranteed. The only question is whether it will be your dignity or your drawers that end up in Mrs. Fotheringill's rose bushes this week. And then there's the necessity of repairs. Victorian underclothes are built to last, but daily life is tough on fabric. Small rips are patched, waistbands are reinforced, and stockings are darned until they have practically no life left. A skilled seamstress can make a pair of drawers outlast the reign of several monarchs, though eventually the garment is more patches than original material. The poor keep patching until even the patches themselves have patches. The affluent donate their used items to charity, where they are immediately put back into circulation by those with even fewer options. Still, the significance of proper undergarments can't be overstated. They are a defence against the cold, a shield against chafing, and a silent witness to every uncomfortable moment of the day. They absorb more than just sweat. They soak up secrets, spilled tea, and the occasional dizzy spell. Every night, you strip off the layers, feeling significantly lighter, and hang them up to air, hoping the fabric will recover its shape and your dignity will return overnight. So, next time you pull on a pair of comfortable, elastic waist briefs, spare a thought for your Victorian ancestors, weighed down by fabric and strict social rules, and take comfort in the fact that while their layers of underclothes were many, their actual cleanliness was mainly just wishful thinking. In the Victorian age, you weren't simply wearing underwear, you were enduring it. When all else fails, perfume is the last resort. Both men and women saturate themselves with lavender water, cologne, or violet powder, desperately hoping that no one will notice. The underlying aroma is one of pure desperation. Victorian life is a constant olfactory adventure, and not in a pleasant way. Between the chimney smoke, packed thoroughfares, questionable plumbing, and a general disinclination for regular bathing, the air is thick with the scent of history and the unmistakable odour of not quite clean. So, Victorians did what any rational person would when faced with overwhelming odds. They tried to camouflage it with faith and fragrance. Perfume became the final defence, a sweet-smelling barrier between public shame and personal dignity. A typical morning ritual might include a quick dab of cologne on the wrists and a large splash down the front of the shirt. Never mind if you looked like you'd just lost a drinking contest with the aftershave bottle. Some relied on rose water, its floral scent battling a desperate duel against last night's boiled cabbage and the faint but persistent whiff of horse. Others preferred the classic lavender for its supposed calming properties, or citrus, which was supposed to cut through the smell of last week's laundry. These weren't subtle scents. They were weaponized aromas designed to shock the nose and buy you precious minutes of perceived freshness. And if liquid fragrance wasn't enough, there was always powder. Powder was everywhere. On hairpieces, faces, feet, and liberally dusted inside shirts and drawers in a hopeful attempt to absorb the day's moisture. Violet powder was fashionable, offering a slight hint of class, while Talcanoris root served as the humble daily heroes, ensuring your armpits were slightly less tragic than your footwear. The powder wasn't only for scent, it was also meant to dull the constant Victorian glow, otherwise known as sweat, and prevent layers of clothing from fusing to your skin. Of course, all this had a cost. Powders and perfumes didn't just mask bad smells, they blended with them, creating potent new aromas that science has yet to properly categorize. The result was a complicated bouquet, a top note of lilies, a heart of sandalwood, and a lingering musky finish of slightly damp wool. Sometimes, when every passenger on the omnibus had made the same aromatic calculation, the competing fragrances merged to create something so powerful it could peel paint off the walls. For the wealthy, perfume also served as a status symbol. Ornate glass bottles sat on dressing tables like small monuments to excess. Expensive scents, imported from Paris, were applied lavishly, and the air in the parlour was heavy with the tangible proof that, yes, this household could afford to pretend to be clean. For the working poor, even the slightest trace of lavender water was a tiny act of defiance against their circumstances, a small piece of portable dignity. Yet there was a delicate balance between smelling pleasant and being aggressively fragrant. Apply too little, and you might as well not have bothered. Apply too much, and you risked suffocating your acquaintances, or worse, revealing that your commitment to actual cleanliness was more theoretical than practical. Social rules demanded a careful equilibrium, just enough scent to imply effort, but not so much that people suspected you were concealing something substantial. And sometimes, despite your best intentions, the day defeats you. A sudden downpour washes away your lavender, leaving behind only the stark reality of your Monday morning self. A heat wave transforms even the finest violet powder into something resembling badly made cake icing. But still, you persevere. Every spray and every puff of powder is an act of hope, a declaration that you refuse to surrender to the overwhelming chaos of the senses. So, as you walk out the door, powdered and perfumed, remember, In Victorian London, you're not just presenting yourself to the world, you're waging a one-person war against the inevitable. You might not win, but you'll certainly smell like you gave it a good try. But the streets aren't just claimed by the animal kingdom. Human activity intensifies the chaos. Street vendors, shoppers, errand boys, chimney sweeps, and the occasional skittish chicken all compete for space. Ladies delicately lift their skirts, picking their way along the driest available ground, yet the risk of stepping on something that squishes is constant. Gentlemen in their top hats bravely stride through the filth, only to be taken down by a rogue banana peel or the unholy combination of laundry runoff and mystery goo trickling from an upstairs window. Meanwhile, the smells are operatic in their complexity. There's the pervasive bass note of manure and damp earth, topped with the sharper odours of vinegar from the pickle stalls, rotting produce from the grocer, fish entrails from the market, and the sweet, heavy scent of spilled beer outside the pub. On Sundays, the stench momentarily gives way to billowing clouds of roasting meat and the promise of gravy. But by Monday morning, the foul air is back, stronger than ever, fuelled by the weekend's indulgences and the city's stubborn refusal to be tamed. On rare clear days, dust billows up from the streets, coating everything and everyone in a layer of fine grey grit. Rainy days are somehow even worse. The mud quickly multiplies, the drains flood, and every step is a gamble. Even the most stylish boots can't handle the assault. Overshoes are treasured possessions, and children compete to see who can jump the widest puddle without vanishing completely. Occasionally, the city sends out teams of street sweepers armed with brooms and grim determination to fight the worst of the grime. Their efforts are noble, but mostly pointless. Within just a few hours, the wave of filth returns, and the sweepers retreat in defeat, followed by the triumphant march of new rubbish. And yet, somehow, life continues. Shopkeepers raise their shutters, vendors set up their displays, and people rush about their business, expertly leaping over the worst patches with practiced ease. The chaos is strangely comforting. The street is a living, ever-changing mosaic of movement and mess. So if you ever find yourself on a Victorian curb, your boots muddy and your nose overwhelmed, just remember that everyone else is right there with you, one squelching, slightly mysterious step at a time. And if you make it back home with your dignity and your socks intact, consider it a small miracle in the great filthy ballet of London existence. For the working class, daily cleanliness is an impossible luxury. Water costs money, soap costs even more, and free time is mythical. Most labourers freshen up with a quick hand wipe and a simple shrug. It's not that working-class Victorians don't want to be clean, it's that the entire universe, economics, and the city's inadequate plumbing has conspired against them. Consider the average labourer, up before dawn, bundled in the same patched trousers and shirt he's worn for years, heading off to a day spent hauling coal, shifting crates, or navigating machinery that despises anything white. By the time he returns home, the only thing keeping him from total exhaustion is a piece of bread, a cup of tea, and the faint hope of a second-hand wash. Water is precious, drawn from a shared pump, lugged up 3 flights of creaking stairs, and usually lukewarm by the time it reaches the top. Every drop is carefully rationed. If you're lucky, you can spare a pint for a quick splash of the face and hands, and maybe, if nobody's watching, a hasty rinse behind the ears. The rest of your personal grooming relies on sheer positive thinking and the wind's power to carry away your more creative aromas. Soap, on the other hand, is the very definition of luxury. Genuine soap, harsh, yellow, and chunky, can cost a week's wages. Most working-class families reserve it for publicly visible areas only. The face, hands, and anything on display during Sunday services. For everything else, there's sand, lye, or the perennial favourite, energetic rubbing. Sometimes a shared bar of soap is stretched so thin it becomes more symbolic than tangible. passed among family members, lost in tubs, and eventually replaced with nothing but stern looks and hopeful sighs. For the majority, a full bath is a major event, reserved for special holidays or truly disastrous situations. The fortunate few can afford the public bathhouses, but even these demand valuable pennies. More often, families make do with a quick rinse in a shared tin basin, a stealthy dunk in the local canal, try not to drink the water, or, for the truly desperate, standing in the yard during a thunderstorm and letting nature do the cleaning. Clothes fare little better. Dresses and work shirts are washed only on the rare occasions that they threaten to develop a hardened crust. Otherwise, they are beaten, brushed, and hung in windows for a good airing. Underclothes, as we've noted, are recycled with the optimism and frequency of a Victorian penny dreadful, hoping that a night draped over a chair by the window will somehow perform a miracle. Shoes are wiped, never polished. Hats are dusted, never cleaned. Jackets are beaten, not laundered, because eventually they'll dry out and from a distance look almost respectable. Children are the most feral. Sent out into the city at dawn, they return covered in a thick film of dirt, bruises, and leftover taffy stuck in their hair. Mothers sigh, lick their thumbs, and scrub away the worst of it with a damp rag and spit, muttering about godliness and cleanliness as if repeating the words often enough will make them true. At some point, everyone lines up for a quick sniff test. Anyone who fails is sent back outside until they've aired out adequately. Still, there's a strange dignity in all of this. Cleanliness might be something to aspire to, but resilience is essential. Neighbours share water when they can, swap soap scraps, and gossip about whose backyard outhouse is the most awful. There is no judgment, only a mutual understanding that everyone is fighting the same losing battle against the grime. The only true sin is to pretend otherwise, so when you encounter the phrase, the great unwashed, understand that it was less about simple laziness and more about sheer survival. Every clean face, every fresh handkerchief was an act of defiance against the city itself and against poverty. The working class may not have smelled of roses, but they persevered, endured, and managed to maintain their pride. One shrug, one scrub, one splash at a time. The wealthy have private bathrooms, hired help for the dirty work, custom scents and silver-plated brushes. The poor simply manage, or they don't. Nowhere is the Victorian fixation on social rank more obvious than in the enormous gap between the always scrubbed and the perpetually grimy. For the upstairs set, ladies, lords, and anyone with the luxury of leisure, cleanliness is a team effort involving a full crew of footmen, valets, and maids. A luxurious townhouse could boast a personal bath, a water closet, and enough hot water to fill a small moat. Of course, the water didn't heat itself. Downstairs, someone is constantly hauling buckets, stoking fires, and ensuring that when Lady Everingham finally decides to bathe, the temperature is precisely halfway between a mild scalding and a cold pond. A lady's morning routine is enough to fill a solid chapter in her diary. She sits at a vanity overflowing with ornate bottles, combs, and brushes fit for a minor princess. She has an ivory-handled comb for every possible occasion, and a silver-backed brush for every type of hair day, plus towels so soft they practically apologise for drying her skin. Her maid is ready with a basin and a jug of warm water, performing the sacred cleaning rituals with the precision of a chemist and the patience of a saint. The mistress emerges perfectly arranged, powdered, and perfumed. Her hands never touch soap unless she's feeling particularly rustic. Men upstairs have it only slightly tougher. A valet polishes their boots, draws their bath, and ensures the shaving water is always just right. Shaving brushes are foamed, razors are sharpened, and every single whisker is dispatched with clinical efficiency. A gentleman's aftershave is an import, arriving in bottles fancier than some people's entire wardrobes. A day that begins with such meticulous care can only end with an air of mild superiority and a pair of gloves. Meanwhile, downstairs, things are far less refined. The servants who maintain all this luxury do so with hands that are constantly raw and chapped from the relentless use of scrubbing brushes, lye, and boiling water. Their baths, if they happen at all, are quick events using whatever water remains after the master and mistress are done. There is no perfumed soap, just the coarse, often homemade stuff that doubles as stain remover and floor cleaner. Personal grooming is done hastily. A comb quickly dragged through the hair, a splash of water from the kitchen pump, and a fervent prayer that no important person suddenly appears in the scullery. Class isn't merely about wealth. It's about who has the privilege of ignoring the physical realities of existence. The upstairs residents drift through clouds of rose and lavender, convinced that hard work is a charming activity performed by peasants in landscape paintings. Downstairs, the servants exchange knowing looks, quietly sharing rumours and soap scraps while rushing to complete their own routines before the next bell rings. If a footman's grimy shirt collar or a maid's cracked hands are noticed, they are silently ignored. The illusion of effortless elegance must, after all, be preserved at all costs. The disparity in access to cleanliness extends to every aspect of life. Linens that are laundered daily upstairs are laundered eventually downstairs. Toothbrushes made of gold leaf and boar bristles upstairs contrast with a hopeful chew on a licorice root downstairs. Even the air smells different. Upstairs it's bouquets and beeswax. Downstairs it's coal dust, cabbage, and whatever the cook just burned. Yet in both worlds, the essential struggle is the same. Everyone is fighting the same constant battle against grime, dirt, and the failings of 19th century plumbing. It's just that some people are significantly better equipped for the war than others. So, the next time you envision a magnificent Victorian manor, look past the silk wallpaper and glittering chandeliers. Remember the invisible army of hands that made it all possible, and the sharp line that separated the weary from the well-scented. Cleanliness may have been adjacent to godliness, but for the vast majority it was simply another way to determine who belonged downstairs and who belonged up. The flush toilet arrived, but only for a select few. Most homes still rely on outhouses, privies, or a convenient alleyway. If you were extremely fortunate, you got a brand new water closet. If not, well, watch where you step. The history of Victorian sanitation is one continuous narrative of reality colliding with optimism. Water closets, as they were officially termed, were the pinnacle of modern engineering, promising privacy, dignity, and the sheer thrill of pulling a chain to make your problems vanish with a deeply satisfying whoosh. At least, that was the sales pitch. For the well-to-do, a water closet was the ultimate sign of status, gleaming porcelain, elaborate piping, and a small room dedicated solely to sitting and contemplating life's deepest questions in relative comfort. For most Londoners, however, the ideal was far from reality. Outside the mansion walls, life was still governed by the ancient privy, typically a small wooden shack at the end of the garden, complete with splinters, spiders, and a chill that could freeze your ambition. Braving a midnight trip in the winter, armed only with a candle and the hope that nothing was lurking in the shadows, was a true test of character. Some privies were communal, shared by entire tenement buildings. Here, privacy meant hoping no one peeked through the gaps in the wood, and hygiene was more of a distant hope than a regular practice. In the crowded city slums, even a privy was a luxury. Dark corners and alleyways became public latrines, much to the dismay of anyone with clean shoes or a functioning nose. The city, constantly overwhelmed by overflowing chamber pots and cesspools, relied on a network of sewer workers and night soil men to keep things just barely contained. The common advice, "don't look down," quickly became a necessary survival strategy. When water closets did appear, they weren't always the marvels advertised. Early plumbing was a wild west of unpredictable drainage and leaky pipes. Some units flooded the floor with the ghosts of past dinners by backing up. Others were so loud they broadcast your activity to the entire household. Discretion came at the expense of privacy. Still, the promise of being able to relieve yourself indoors without facing the neighbour's judging gaze or the elements was enough to overlook nearly every flaw. Wrestling with plumbing upkeep is a special kind of hell. If you've got money, you employ a valet or a sanitary engineer, think a top hat wearing plumber, to fret over the mechanics. Otherwise, you're solo, jabbing a broom handle into mystery blockages and just praying the whole thing doesn't explode. In some neighbourhoods, the ideal time to flush is when your neighbours are out. Nobody wants the ignominy of causing a small-scale flood that cascades through the entire building. Every so often, innovators pop up promising fixes: self-scouring basins, superior ventilation, or even custom traps for the more adventurous city rats. The results, predictably, are a mixed bag. All this new tech, naturally, is bundled with social friction. The flush toilet stands as both a mechanical miracle and a source of deep moral anxiety. Is it truly clean? Is it even decent? Could sitting on that cold porcelain actually drain you of your vital youthful energy? Editorials rage in the morning papers. Etiquette manuals dedicate long passages to the proper protocol for using this newfangled device without causing alarm to yourself or your guests. Meanwhile, the vast majority stick to their trusty backyard outhouse, thankful for any setup that keeps humanity's worst byproducts at arm's length. Kids, of course, adapt fastest. A new toilet is a source of delight. Chains to yank, funny gurgling sounds, and an excellent hiding spot for a few precious minutes of hide and seek before a bewildered adult inevitably tracks them down. Pets, conversely, are utterly unfazed, viewing the whole business as a weird human ritual. So, whether you're perched on a sleek porcelain commode or balancing on a wobbly privy seat, just remember, Victorian sanitation wasn't aiming for flawless perfection. It was about making do, getting by, and inventing ever more elaborate ways to keep the crud mostly outdoors. Progress in this particular arena truly moves at a snail's pace. And sometimes that pace takes it right through your kitchen. Every Victorian shares their bed with a thriving zoo of insects. Bed curtains aren't just for show, they're designed to corral the local fauna. If you wake up without a single fresh bite, you should probably check your pulse. As the gas light is dimmed and you settle in for the night, the last thing you'd want to think about is pest control. But in Victorian England, pest control isn't a battle. It's more of an uneasy ceasefire, a mutual pact not to start screaming before breakfast. The first rule: don't shake your sheets too vigorously, or you risk starting a small impromptu stampede. You've already survived a long day of coal smog, street grit, and your neighbour's nosy questions. Now, underneath your layers of patched quilt, you are definitely not alone. Your skin tingles. That tiny itch could be anything: a stray thread, a breadcrumb flake, or a small ambitious creature with legs. Lice are everywhere, spreading from one head to the next with all the subtlety of an uninvited dinner guest. Fleas, on the other hand, are Olympic athletes capable of crossing an entire pillow in a single, mighty jump. But bedbugs are the real pros, nesting deep in the seams of your mattress, only emerging under the cloak of night to leave their signature, a maddening, itchy constellation on your arms and ankles. Nightly routines take on a near-military precision. Combs with unbelievably tight teeth, called knit combs, are dragged mercilessly through hair, snagging both knots and unwelcome inhabitants. For truly intractable cases, the family might resort to home remedies: kerosene, vinegar, a harsh scrub with lye soap, or, if things are truly awful, just shearing the hair off and starting fresh. Parents examine their children's scalps by candlelight, squinting to spot movement and muttering the same curses that their great-grandparents once did as they lost this same fight. Those fabric bed curtains serve two purposes. They grant privacy and block the drafts, but mostly they function as an elaborate obstacle course for determined insects. In upscale homes, the curtains are boiled and perfumed seasonally to discourage pests. In less fortunate dwellings, they are simply beaten, aired out, and prayed over. The hope is that most of the tiny invaders will fall out before you climb in, or at minimum they'll stay on their designated side of the mattress. Scratching is a simple fact of life. At any Victorian dinner party, you'll spot at least one person attempting, with varying degrees of stealth, to deal with an itch they definitely should not have. Etiquette guides offer minimal help beyond suggesting a discreet exit. If you scratch in public, the only proper response is to blame the weather, or, if you're truly desperate, pretend you're demonstrating mime a barn animal. Whole new businesses bloom around this problem. Sharp salesmen hawk unique lotions, powders, and even strange mechanical flea traps that look alarmingly like tools for torturing cheese sandwiches. Perfumers pivot, developing scents so potent they guarantee to repel everything with legs. There are posters, pamphlets, and mysterious homemade tonics. None of them fully effective, but all of them selling a little bit of hope. The wealthy might buy a brand new mattress or even burn their old one every few years. The poor rely on a regular beating of the mattress, not each other, though that did happen too. Every spring, mattresses are dragged into the yard and pummeled almost to death, sending up huge clouds of dust, loose feathers, and a few old friends. Some families keep cats or dogs, hoping the pet will draw the bulk of the infestation, a sort of sacrificial offering to the gods of unrelenting itching. Others embrace folk wisdom, sprigs of dried lavender under the pillow, chestnuts tucked into mattress corners, and the endless wish that tonight, finally, the bugs will grant a reprieve. But in Victorian England, wishful thinking only goes so far. If you wake up without any new bites, you are incredibly lucky. More likely, you greet the morning with a fresh batch of itches, knowing tonight's sleep will be just as action-packed as the last. You never asked for these pets, but you live with them, scratching, waiting, and hoping for the day someone finally invents a mattress that doesn't literally crawl back. Until then, it's just you, the bugs, and the unspoken rule. Don't ask who was here first. Should you need medical aid, Victorian hospitals are not exactly known for their spotless conditions. Surgical implements are wiped clean on an apron, bed sheets are rotated communally, and infection is practically just a feature, not a bug. You approach the hospital's massive stone entrance not with a sense of security, but with a deep, unsettling fear. A trip here is always a gamble. Part medical miracle, part unfortunate lottery ticket, where the grand prize is merely surviving something new. If you're unlucky enough to land in the charity ward, you're hit with a wall of smell that can only be called historic. It's a rich blend of unwashed bodies, stale bread, long-standing urine, and just a dash of carbolic acid thrown in for theatrical effect. The beds are crammed into tight rows, sometimes separated by a thin curtain, but more often by the pure hope that your neighbour doesn't cough or sneeze in your direction. The bed sheets, such as they are, circulate among patients after little more than a quick, dismissive shake, or if you're particularly blessed, a splash of vinegar. Pillows are communal, and if you spot a stray hair or a tiny crumb, consider it a small, unexpected gift from the last patient. The doctors and surgeons stride down the aisle, looking grand in their blood-splattered coats, which serve as proof of past triumphs, or perhaps as stern warnings. There's no hand sanitizer. Soap is a luxury. The idea of washing one's hands between treating patients is still seen as a radical, almost suspiciously European eccentricity. Surgical instruments, the bone saws, forceps and scalpels, are cleaned with a quick smear on the surgeon's apron, which is itself decorated with the greatest hits of all last month's operations. The operating theatre is not a place for the sensitive. Family members are sometimes invited to attend, if only to act as witnesses in case things go severely wrong. Anesthesia is rare for most procedures. You get a generous shot of liquor, a leather strap to clamp down on, and the steadying encouragement of a nurse who has truly seen it all and is not easily impressed. Her uniform starts white, but by day's end, it's a shade closer to taupe. Instruments rattle on the metal trays, and if you're really lucky, the surgeon will be humming a pleasant little song to distract from the fact that his hands are visibly shaking. Infection is the silent partner in every ward. Patients who manage to survive their initial injury often find themselves fighting a new contest with hospital fever, sepsis, or, for the optimists, character building. A wound is washed with cold water, maybe dabbed with a drop of whiskey, and then wrapped up in a linen bandage that has been shared with half the population of Whitechapel. If your condition deteriorates, you might get the absolute latest therapy, a liberal application of leeches, or a poultice, with a recipe that predates the very notion of germ theory. Ventilation is a foreign concept, managed mostly by the occasional open window and whatever weak draught happens to wander through. The stench never leaves. It hangs over the whole ward like a wet, dirty shroud. Rats, finding hospitals as appealing as anyone else, skitter between the beds, occasionally pausing to investigate a dropped piece of food. If you're fortunate, the nurse chases them off with her slipper. If not, they become your unofficial roommates. Yet, for all its terrifying risks, the hospital remains your only hope. Miracles do happen here. Patients limp in with crushed limbs, and through a combination of sheer luck, grit and experimental surgery, manage to walk out weeks later. There's a powerful sense of fellowship among the sick, a shared gallows humour as patients bet on who will be discharged first and who will end up as another cautionary tale. Lying back on your protesting mattress, listening to the groans, the coughs and the far-off sound of a surgeon singing "God Save the Queen," you realise that hygiene here is less a firm rule and more a vague suggestion. And yet, day after day, people recover, or at least survive. And life goes on. Victorian hospitals, the original escape rooms. If you make it out alive with all your original parts and only minor trauma, you've definitely beaten the house. Good soap costs a fortune, so most people have to settle for harsh lye or rough sand. Fancily scented bars are saved only for important guests, major holidays, and people you're trying to impress or absolutely must not insult. In Victorian England, soap isn't merely a cleaning product, it's a potent status symbol. The elite might show off delicate, perfumed cakes of almond or rose soap on silver platters in their washrooms, intended more for admiration than for actual use. For the vast majority, the daily reality is much tougher. The common bar of household soap is a hefty block of yellow lye, powerful enough to scour away dirt, grease, and occasionally the first few layers of your skin. If you're poor, you might use the family recipe, a formula passed down for generations and improved only by the random addition of whatever cooking fat and wood ashes were available that month. Laundry Day showcases soap's true might. But for everyday washing, most folks are tight-fisted with the precious stuff. The bar is carefully rationed, whittled down to a slippery, useless sliver, which is then pressed onto the next new bar. Waste not, want not. For the exceptionally frugal, when the soap is gone, a handful of sand, a pinch of raw lye, or just a vigorous scrub with a coarse rag is considered quite enough. Some swear by using wood ashes, although this particular cleaning method is only recommended for people who don't mind smelling faintly of a cold fireplace. Children are constantly threatened with the stuff as a punishment. Wash your mouth out is not a metaphor. The taste of lye soap is a lesson that lasts longer than most others. And may the heavens help any child caught touching the guest soap, which is kept locked in a high drawer, only to be brought out for visiting clergy, distant relatives, or very rarely the family themselves, usually after a sudden windfall or at Christmas. Bath night is where soap's politics truly emerge. The person who gets in the tub first claims the lion's share. The last person in line is lucky to see a single bubble. Many a Victorian child grew up convinced that the only thing thinner than their weekly watery stew was the soap in their bath water. Those who could afford it occasionally splurged on toilet soap, a name that sounds far grander than it is, such as imported French bars wrapped in elegant paper, stamped with royal crests, representing the peak of sophistication suitable for a wedding, a funeral, or simply making your neighbours intensely jealous. The scent of soap is its own social language. Lemon, almond, rose, and lavender all hint at refinement, provided you don't use so much that people suspect you're trying to cover up something far worse underneath. Too heavy a fragrance is just as suspicious as none at all, and a sudden wave of jasmine in a packed room can instantly draw every curious eye. The working classes, meanwhile, often go unscented, their only perfume the scent of hard labour and sheer determination to get through the week. For the truly thrifty, used soap scraps end up tossed in a jar, melted down with a bit of water to create a slimy, gelatinous mass known as soap jelly. It's not pretty, but it absolutely gets the job done. Even then, every little sliver of the bar and every drop of lather is carefully accounted for. There are always stories about the eccentric old aunt who kept a bar of soap in her linen drawer for a decade, only bringing it out for major religious holidays or exceptionally dirty grandchildren. Despite its humble, everyday purpose, soap occasionally becomes a subject of intense public discussion. Newspapers print breathless articles about new hygienic marvels like carbolic soap, which promises to kill all germs, eliminate all odours, and possibly cure every known disease, if you can afford it. Soap companies desperately compete for royal endorsements, their advertisements featuring promises of alabaster smooth skin and purity fit for a queen. Ordinary people read these grand claims and just sigh, knowing their own brick of soap is mostly useful for laundry and possibly warding off stray dogs. Still, soap is an unsung hero in the Victorian Hygiene story. It is the weapon of choice in the endless campaign against filth, even if it leaves your hands raw and your wallet a little lighter. The next time you lather up with a gentle, nicely scented liquid, remember the Victorians scrubbing away with grit, sand, and grim tenacity, saving the truly good stuff for moments that really mattered, or for when company arrived. Entire businesses sprung up around the towering piles of dirty linen. The women who performed this labour were as tough as any blacksmith, and just as likely to possess arms of steel. London's Victorian laundry women are legends in their own right, the true unheralded titans of cleanliness. Long before the invention of the washing machine or any kind of ergonomic design, these women battled huge mounds of filthy shirts, petticoats and stockings armed with nothing but raw muscle, a wooden washboard and an unyielding dedication to their job. Their day started before the sun rose with the echoing clatter of buckets and the creaking of manual wringers, and finished long after dark, their hands permanently shriveled from lye water, their backs aching but somehow still standing tall. To be a laundry woman was essentially signing up for a kind of domestic boot camp. Water had to be carried by hand, often from a public well halfway down the block or from the suspicious, icy river that skirted the edge of town. Shoulders straining under the weight of sloshing pails, these women learned quickly that proper posture was a luxury for the privileged and idle. Once the water was finally boiling in huge copper cauldrons, which needed to be constantly stoked, refilled and watched like a cranky toddler, the true effort began. Soap was parcelled out with military precision, if they even had any. Lye, either bought or made at home, was the go-to substance for obliterating stains, and sometimes the top layer of skin. The lye stings, cuts, and roughens the hands, but the dirt eventually gives in, if only out of sheer respect for the person wielding the brush. Every single piece of clothing is examined, vigorously scrubbed, and then beaten against a stone slab or rubbed harshly across a ridged washboard, which is about as gentle on fabric as a cheese grater. White linens are boiled until they reach a rolling froth with the occasional special ingredient, bluing, starch, or, for a touch of class, a drop of lavender water to give it a whiff of respectability. Rinsing and wringing are next, a process that would make most Victorian strongmen weep. The laundry, soaking wet and incredibly heavy, is hauled to rinse tubs. Here it is savagely twisted and squeezed until the water runs mostly clear. For especially heavy items like quilts, work trousers or thick petticoats, it often requires 2 or 3 women working together to manage the sheer bulk. So, if you ever wonder where the phrase iron grip originated, just look no further than the local wash house. Drying presents another major logistical hurdle. Clotheslines crisscross every alley, yard and rooftop, transforming the city into a billowing, ghostly forest of drawers and petticoats. Every laundrywoman has a terrifying anecdote about garments that went rogue in a fierce windstorm, or some unfortunate kid who had to retrieve bloomers from a neighbour's chimney. Wet clothes freeze rock solid in winter, hang limp and perpetually damp in the London fog, and attract coal dust faster than you can shout, "Industrial Revolution!" Ironing, if you even get to this stage, is not for the faint of heart. Heavy flat irons are heated on the stove and wielded with the precision of a master blacksmith. The iron is heavy enough to serve as a doorstop and must be tested on a scrap of fabric before trusting it with a client's best shirt, lest you leave a scorch mark shaped like a terrible mistake. Starch is carefully applied to cuffs and collars, resulting in garments stiff enough to stand up entirely on their own and about as comfortable. And then, after all this work, comes the delivery. Laundry women lug wicker baskets, sometimes almost as large as they are, through muddy streets and up endless staircases, returning the clean bundles to their clients, who are grateful, if not always fast, with payment. Compensation is rarely prompt, but the respect is hard-earned and undeniable. Everyone in town knows who can get the stains out, who returns a collar the whitest, and who can be trusted with delicate silk or wool. These women carry the dignity of the entire city on their shoulders, alongside half its linens. So, the next time you put on a crisp shirt or admire a clean sheet, remember the blisters, the massive biceps, and the deep-seated grit that made it all possible. The laundry women of Victorian England, the true iron ladies. Feet are largely overlooked until they start making loud, alarming noises. Boots are rigid, socks are basically optional, and corn plasters feel like literal medieval torture devices. In the formal hierarchy of Victorian personal care, feet are the forgotten peasants, left to just manage on their own until they finally stage a full-scale uprising. Most mornings, you simply cram your feet into thick, heavy boots designed for pure survival rather than any kind of comfort, and you hope for a miracle. Socks, if you are lucky enough to own a pair, are thin, perpetually damp from either the heavy London fog or a badly timed step into a dubious puddle, and often consist of more holes than fabric. It's an age of massive industry and invention, but tragically not of decent footwear. The standard boot is an exercise in sheer discipline made from unforgiving, stiff leather. Broken in usually just means barely less painful than the moment you bought them. For the poor, used boots are common. Shoes that have already been shaped to the mysterious odours, odd bunions, and unique quirks of a previous owner. You lace up, wince in pain, and immediately get on with your day. Women's shoes aren't much better. Delicate slippers for the wealthy, heavy chunky ankle boots for the working class, and a massive lack of any real arch support for absolutely everyone. Sometimes fashion demands absurdly high heels or pointy toes, which is great for your posture if your main goal is to never actually put your full weight down. Victorians are nothing if not incredibly resourceful, and foot care largely involves creative forms of neglect. When blisters inevitably appear, the home cure is a simple corn plaster. A scrap of fabric soaked in strong vinegar and then tied down so tightly you lose all feeling in your foot. For those with a few pennies to spare, a visit to the barber surgeon might result in a quick slice and dice job on a stubborn ingrown nail or a bunion, performed with a sharp knife and the encouraging reassurance that it will only sting a little. Socks are patched until there is literally nothing left to patch, and some people just go barefoot inside, airing out their toes and praying that the cat doesn't mistake them for a new toy. Aromatic foot baths are a massive luxury reserved for the truly decadent. For everyone else, a swift wipe with a wet rag and maybe a sprinkle of talcum powder is the closest they'll get to a spa treatment. You might hear vague rumours of chiropodists, the early podiatrists, performing wonders with oils and files. But the average Victorian will never meet one. Instead, you develop a deep, complicated friendship with your own calluses, picking, shaving, and sometimes just ignoring them until the next harvest. Winter brings a new set of foot-related miseries, chilblains. These painful, itchy swellings are a strange badge of honour for anyone who has walked home on frozen cobblestones. Remedies are numerous and often contradictory. Rub your feet with goose fat, soak them in mustard water, or just complain very loudly until spring arrives. And don't forget the looming danger of trench foot, usually for soldiers but not unknown among the city's poorest, especially those whose boots have more air holes than actual soles. In richer homes, a footman, yes, the name comes from this, might help the master or mistress with a daily foot washing and a fresh pair of soft slippers. But for most people, swollen, aching feet are just another part of existence, something to stoically endure, not something to discuss. By the end of a long Victorian day, you kick off your heavy boots with a sigh that is half utter relief, half existential despair. If you're lucky, you avoid stubbed toes, splinters, and whatever else is hiding between the floorboards. You might take a moment to rub your arches, mentally promising to treat your feet better next week. You won't. So the next time you admire a pair of comfortable modern sneakers or indulge in the wild decadence of soft cushioned socks, spare a thought for your ancestors. Their feet bore the full brunt of a world that existed before gel inserts and specialised foot doctors, relentlessly soldiering on through mud, misery, and the never-ending advance of progress, one battered boot, blister, and bunion at a time. Facial hair is a blend of bacteria trap and bold fashion statement. Moustache wax, hotel soap, and oil are the daily necessities, at least for any man who can actually afford the rigorous effort of its upkeep. The Victorian era is the undisputed golden age of facial hair. Everywhere you look, a beard is being thoughtfully stroked, a moustache twirled with pride, or a set of impressive sideburns admired in a foggy mirror. Gentlemen fiercely compete to see whose whiskers can achieve the most visually arresting flair. Chin curtains, mutton chops, and handlebar moustaches capable of taking out an eye in a crowded carriage. For the extremely ambitious, there's even the Dundreary, a set of side whiskers so grand they practically have their own busy social calendar. But caring for all that facial real estate is not a pursuit for the easily discouraged or the light of wallet. The tools of the trade are costly and time-consuming: a straight, sturdy razor, a stiff-bristled brush, a solid block of shaving soap that smells faintly of camphor and deep regret. And, if you're aiming for true elegance, a silver-plated comb for shaping the ends. The morning ritual starts with hot water, a precious and rare resource for most, heated laboriously in a battered kettle and poured into a shallow basin. If you are wealthy, your valet prepares it all for you. If you are not, you make do with whatever lukewarm water is left over from the washing up. Shaving is a daily perilous trial. Straight razors are wickedly sharp and absolutely unforgiving. Cuts are a frequent occurrence and are usually treated with a simple dab of alum or whatever clean cloth is nearest. For those who want to avoid the risk altogether, beards are the much safer option. A thick beard serves a dual purpose. It successfully hides a multitude of shaving mistakes and provides protection for your chin against the bitter cold, the harsh wind, and the occasional sharp word from your mother-in-law. Soap is critical but not always gentle. Everyday bath soap is harsh and strips away more than just the dirt. The best shaving soaps, either made at home or imported, work up a rich, creamy lather that can soften even the most stubborn bristles. After the ordeal, a splash of lavender water or bay rum soothes both your skin and your bruised ego, leaving you with the vague, pleasant scent of a spice rack. For the truly dedicated fashion enthusiast, moustache wax is a daily requirement. These small tins of oil and beeswax are treasured possessions, applied in tiny amounts with near-surgical precision. Achieving a perfectly curled moustache is an act that combines science and high art. Too much wax and you look like you've dipped your face in cooking fat. Too little and the entire structure collapses at the first sign of humidity. The result, when perfectly executed, is a work of architectural genius that might just survive a stern handshake or a heavy windstorm. Of course, with magnificent facial hair comes immense responsibility. Moustaches and beards are great collectors of everything: tobacco ash, soup, crumbs, and the faint, lingering aroma of last night's dinner. The saying, "food in your beard," is not a joke, but a near-daily reality. Regular washing is essential for anyone who wants to avoid the dreaded beard itch, or, worse, turning their facial hair into a thriving tiny ecosystem. Oil, brush and comb are used daily, but there's only so much that can be done. For those unwilling or unable to participate in this whiskered arms race, life is simpler but far less interesting. The clean-shaven look, favoured by a few mavericks and teenage boys everywhere, still demands daily attention, significant courage, and a willingness to explain your choices to every person you meet. There are always whispers about new breakthroughs, safety razors, special new oils, and mysterious Eastern tonics that promise to make your beard grow faster or your moustache even twirlier. Most of these are scams, but hope, like facial hair itself, never dies. Socially, your facial hair broadcasts a distinct message. The grander your whiskers, the more people assume you are powerful, wise, and possibly harbouring a small family of mice. If you choose to be clean-shaven, you're either very young, incredibly modern, or trying hard to impress someone's elderly grandmother. Either way, prepare for the questions. So, the next time you admire a breathtaking Victorian beard in an antique photo, remember the meticulous effort and the hidden tiny mysteries within. In a time before disposable razors and mass-produced beard oils, every moustache was a masterpiece. Every beard a labour of absolute love, and every single whisker a tiny bristling badge of honour. Communal bathhouses function as both social clubs and, for some, mildly scandalous destinations. It's a genuine toss-up whether you'll leave feeling cleaner or simply better informed. Step inside a Victorian bathhouse and you're entering not just a place to scrub off the week's soot, but the hottest epicentre for rumours, local news and questionable advice this side of the River Thames. For those without the luxury of a private bathtub, which is almost everyone, the bathhouse is where society congregates to soak, steam and spill secrets in equal amounts. Rows of large copper tubs line the steamy main hall, each one separated by a wide berth of wishful thinking and a flimsy curtain if the management is feeling particularly generous. The ritual starts at the front desk, where you hand over your penny and silently pray that there is any hot water remaining in the tank. A tired attendant, half scandalised and half bored, points you toward your assigned spot. The echoing tile walls ensure that every conversation instantly becomes community property. Whispers bounce, laughter ricochets, and arguments occasionally erupt like bursting soap bubbles. If you intend to keep a secret, you will have to hold your breath, both literally and figuratively. Men and women bathe at different times mostly, but that hardly slows the flow of gossip. For the women, the bathhouse is an informal indoor market for advice. Home remedies, marriage habits of the neighbours, and the latest hairstyles are analysed in hushed tones over clouds of violet powder. There's always one matron who insists her lavender hair rinse cured both her chilblains and her husband's wandering eye. The rest listen, half believing, half planning what they'll try next week. The gentlemen, meanwhile, treat the bathhouse as part debate society, part grooming lounge, and part unofficial stock exchange. Serious arguments about the price of coal and the wisdom of the latest public works mingle with debates about cricket scores and whether Lord So-and-so's moustache is, in fact, entirely real. In the corner, someone is always reading the newspaper aloud, adding his own loud commentary in a stage whisper. If you ever wondered how half the city finds out about the other half's scandals, look no further than the echo chamber of the communal bath. For the mildly adventurous, the bathhouse is also a place of subtle intrigue. The faint lingering scent of the previous bather's perfume hangs in the air, mixed with the sharp musk of damp wool and the clean tang of soap. Couples occasionally arrange secret meetings under the guise of simply needing a scrub. Friends make important pacts over shared sponges and steaming kettles. There's even the odd political scheme hatched out between soapy elbows and discreet throat clearings. Of course, not every person is there for the latest gossip. Some genuinely just want a proper scrub. The hot water loosens stiff muscles sore from a long day's work, and the simple act of lathering up feels almost decadently luxurious. But even here, you are never truly alone. Children gleefully splash each other in the shallow end, much to the annoyance of anyone hoping for silence. Elderly patrons regale anyone within earshot with epic stories of real bathhouses back in the old country, where the towels were softer, the water was hotter, and the scandal was even more deliciously juicy. The rules of etiquette are as fluid as the water. If you drop your soap, you must pretend that was your intention. If you accidentally overhear a secret, you store it away for later use. The most sacred rule: never, under any circumstances, inquire about the source of that mysterious floating object in the next tub. When your bath is finished, you wrap up in a towel that has absolutely seen better centuries and emerge cleaner in body, if not necessarily in conscience. You've successfully swapped one layer of city grime for a new layer of local colour. Stepping back onto the busy street, you realise you've just been soaking in a rich stew of the city's deepest secrets and maybe, just maybe, an occasional truth. So the next time you dream of a Victorian bath, remember it's about much more than just the water and soap. It's about the society, the stories, and the constant possibility that you'll walk away with a tale far juicier than your neighbour's mutton stew. Cleanliness might be next to godliness, but in the bathhouse, it's always right beside the very latest gossip. Living near a factory guarantees a daily dose of aroma, coal smoke, chemical waste, and, if you're close to the river, whatever interesting stench is wafting off the water. This is Victorian progress, where prosperity carries the distinct smell of sulphur and yesterday's used dye vat. The city is booming, smokestacks dominate the skyline, constantly churning out plumes that manage to blot out the sun on a good day and resemble a biblical pestilence on a bad one. Every single morning you step outside and inhale a unique, toxic cocktail of innovation. Iron filings, coal dust, and a faint hint of whatever mysterious goo is currently being pumped into the Thames this week. Factories are everywhere, looming over the rows of crowded terraces like powerful, iron-fisted landlords. Their presence is impossible to ignore. If the non-stop noise doesn't keep you awake, the overpowering smells certainly will. In the streets surrounding the dye works, the air is perpetually tinted with an unholy synthetic blend of chemicals. Sometimes the smell is sharp, sometimes faintly sweet, but always unsettlingly worrying. Clothes hung outdoors to dry don't so much air out as they marinate, coming back inside with subtle, unwanted notes of factory chic. Sometimes it's burnt sugar, sometimes vinegar, and sometimes it's something so bizarre you can't possibly identify it. You'll spend the entire day dwelling on it. The conditions in the coal yards offer no relief. Black fuel piles up, arriving in enormous quantities by barge and cart, leaving whole districts dusted in a layer of fine soot. Kids wipe their noses and come away with streaks that a seasoned miner would find impressive. Your hair is never truly clean. Your teeth, if you aren't vigilant, begin to taste of smoke. With every breath, locals develop a certain grim pride in their unique local atmosphere. "That's the smell of industry, lad," a neighbour might declare, casually batting away a dense, choking cloud as if it were a persistent insect. "Means there's money in the air." Then you have the river, the Thames, already burdened by the constant donations from countless chamber pots, receives an extra shipment daily from every brewery, tannery and chemical plant lining its banks. If you live close enough, you can gauge the day's production by the water's colour. A deep blue. The indigo dyers are ahead of schedule. Reddish brown. The leatherworks are clearly hustling. If it's bubbling without explanation, it's best not to inquire. Those who live unfortunately close to the factories have developed their own survival methods. Windows stay sealed even in the heat of summer to keep the worst fumes out. Handkerchiefs and scarves are tied over noses and mouths, making everyone look like an amateur bandit. Ventilating a room becomes a choice between evils: burnt coal, rancid fish, or the faint but constant whiff of sulphur drifting from the matchworks down the block. Laundry is a never-ending fight. Clean sheets turn grey almost immediately. Clothes hung out to dry are often indistinguishable from the soot-covered alley they're dangling in. Soot invades your tea, your stew, and even your thoughts. The ambitious sell specialised scrapers for shoes and brushes for both hair and hats. The less ambitious just sigh, accepting their new industrial coating. The city's wealthier areas may avoid the worst of it, but even there, the wind brings reminders. On a damp, foggy morning, the entire city seems to vibrate with the scent of enterprise, an unseen badge of progress. "We're living in the future," someone might pronounce, coughing politely into a perfumed silk cloth. "A little smoke is a small price to pay." Children play in the factory shadows, inventing games that involve expertly dodging pools of questionable liquid. They'll either grow up with iron lungs or at least the ability to differentiate between Monday's soot and Friday's sludge. Visitors complain, residents brag, and through it all, London continues to get richer and increasingly more fragrant. So, next time you light a fancy candle and grumble about a neighbour's barbecue smoke, spare a thought for the Victorians, for whom success always included a dose of coal smoke, a dash of mystery steam, and the nagging suspicion you left a window open just a fraction too long. Victorian children are typically just small, dirtier grown-ups. They don't wash often, run unsupervised, and bring home every germ the city has on offer. If you've ever wondered what you get when you mix unstoppable curiosity, industrial waste, and a total disregard for soap, just look at a Victorian kid. Etiquette books might mention little angels in lace, but the reality is a horde of ragamuffins, scuffed knees and all, who define clean as anything that isn't actively sticky. A real bath is a rare event, generally saved for Christmas, a disastrous fall into a mud puddle, or a lice infestation severe enough to become neighbourhood gossip. The morning clean-up ritual, if it happens, is quick. A cold, damp cloth to the face, a comb violently yanked through tangles, and a stern warning not to wipe your nose on your sleeve, which everyone ignores anyway. Some kids are subjected to a lickin' promise, a mother's spit-dipped thumb applied with force to the grimiest spots. This is followed by a quick check for obvious stains, and, if you're lucky, a threat involving a bar of soap if you turn up at school looking like a chimney sweep. Speaking of school, the classroom is less a sanctuary of learning and more a germ factory. Desks are shared, slates are passed around, and everyone coughs without covering their mouth. Teachers try their best, but there's only so much they can do when their students just finished sorting rags at the mill or chasing stray dogs through the market. Disease is a constant companion. Measles, scarlet fever, whooping cough, and lice make up the unofficial lesson plan. Hand-washing is an idealistic suggestion, and sharing water bottles or drinking straight from the public pump is standard practice. Outdoors, children's cleanliness standards plummet even further. Shoes, if a child is fortunate enough to have them, are quickly lost or traded. Socks disappear in pairs. A child in a full, tidy uniform at the day's start is a miracle by midday, shirt untucked, hair a mess, and sporting a fresh layer of street grime. Play areas, such as they are cobblestone alleys, coal yards and riverbanks best described as biohazards. Mud, ash, and whatever local animals left behind are all part of the fun. Bath night, when it finally arrives, is another family saga. Children are typically last in line, after parents, older siblings, and maybe the family pet. By the time the youngest climbs in, the water has achieved a strange murkiness with floating detritus that defies simple classification. Still, they splash, scrub, and emerge victorious, hair slicked down and faces shining. It might not be perfectly clean, but it's a start. And for a fleeting moment, the house smells less like an adventure and more like carbolic soap. Laundry is another war zone. Clothes are mended, passed down and washed only when absolutely unavoidable. Kids are experts at finding the muddiest patch of ground within moments of changing into clean pants. Mothers sigh, children protest, and the cycle of grime continues. Socks and undergarments are hung to air out, in the hopeful theory that fresh air can accomplish what water cannot. The general rule is, if it's not actually moving, it's probably acceptable. Despite the mess, these children possess an incredible resilience. They may be grubby, but they're quick-witted, tough, and unfazed by the small indignities of grit and dirt. They develop robust immune systems, or at least a powerful tolerance for nasty smells and irritating bites. Childhood is fast and hectic, full of noise, action, and the constant challenge of staying one step ahead of the nearest washcloth. So, next time you see a spotless child in a painting, remember that the actual Victorian kid is a walking, running, often tumbling force of nature. Cleanliness is a distant goal, but energy and mischief are always in plentiful supply. In the epic story of Victorian Hygiene, children aren't lowering the bar. They're joyfully burying it in the yard, probably near a frog and someone's missing boot. Combs, brushes, tongue scrapers, and even early razors, tools that look like they belong in a horror movie. But hey, at least you're making an effort. In the proud tradition of Victorian self-improvement, no morning is complete without a quick but hazardous confrontation with the era's essential grooming instruments. Imagine opening your drawer to an unsettling collection of implements, some made of bone, others of horn, and a few that look suspiciously like repurposed farm equipment. Victorian society put a premium on a respectable appearance, and with indoor plumbing still in its infancy, your collection of grooming tools had to do the work that a modern bathroom full of gadgets does today, though with much more potential for drama and the occasional small cut. Let's begin with the comb. For most Victorians, this wasn't a styling aid, but an exercise in endurance. The family comb, passed from person to person, was built tough enough to survive a house fire, but not so gentle on the scalp. Every stroke was a risk. Will it untangle, or will it unearth an entire community of head lice? If you were lucky enough to own a fine-toothed night comb, you were also the family's primary defence in the endless battle against tiny pests. Forget the soft plastic bristles of today. These teeth were so close together you could practically strain soup with them. Next, the brush. Hairbrushes were serious objects, with handles substantial enough to serve as emergency back scratchers and bristles stiff enough to clean a muddy boot. The wealthy could afford imported boar bristle or ivory-backed models, while others had to settle for whatever wood and animal hair was available. Daily brushing wasn't just to smooth out snags, it was for distributing natural oils, stimulating the scalp, and, with hope, creating a faint sheen that suggested cleanliness if you looked quickly. Razors in the Victorian age were neither disposable nor forgiving. They were straight-edged, heavy, and needed daily sharpening on a leather strop. The act of shaving demanded the focus of a bomb expert, since a moment's lapse meant a day spent explaining a suspicious neck gash to acquaintances. Early safety razors were just appearing, but the term safe was highly optimistic at best. Aftershave, typically a splash of cold water, spirits or lavender oil, acted as both a disinfectant and a harsh wake-up call. Then you had the more specialised devices. Tongue scrapers, for instance, are exactly as crude as they sound. A thin metal loop for scraping the unspeakable from your tongue, hoping your breath would be slightly less offensive. Nail scissors, cuticle knives and tweezers completed the kit, though their design seemed intended less for precision and more for instilling humility in the user. Even toothpicks got the Victorian upgrade, with ornate silver handles for those who wished to clean their teeth and show off their wealth simultaneously. Ladies' vanities were a portrait of organised disorder. Hairpins, curling tongs heated in the fire, tiny scissors and pots of pomade, a mixture of fat, oil and, if you were extravagant, rosewater. Eyebrow tweezers were wielded with the kind of fierce determination usually reserved for a duel. The brave, or the slightly reckless, attempted to curl their eyelashes with a heated needle, with varied results, and the occasional singed eyelash. The less glamorous reality of grooming was never far off. Tools were rarely cleaned, they were simply wiped on a cloth and put back in the drawer. It was common for an entire family to share a single comb or brush, resulting in a shared sense of minor misery and the occasional outbreak of something better left unmentioned. Still, every scrape, stroke and snip was a step toward respectability in a society that judged you on your hairstyle, your polished look and the state of your sideburns. Even a simple moment of grooming was an act of optimism. So you gathered your courage, grasped your brush with determination and bravely entered the battle. Because looking decent in Victorian England wasn't just about hygiene, it was about survival with a bit of flair. When all else failed, you held a perfumed handkerchief to your nose and tried to make it through the day. It was practical, stylish, and a clear announcement to everyone. I smell the same terrible things you do, and I'm equally disgusted. A vital Victorian survival tool, the perfumed handkerchief was far more than a fashion accessory. It served as the social equivalent of an air freshener, an emotional safety blanket, and a polite way to suggest, yes, that is horse manure, and no, I am not happy about it. Tucked into a sleeve, held to the lips, and sometimes dramatically waved, the scented cloth became your personal defence against the city's vast, invisible cloud of bad air. Preparation was a ritual in itself. In your private room, you'd sprinkle a few precious drops of lavender water or rose oil onto the finest linen you could manage, which, frankly, probably still bore a mysterious stain from last winter. The more daring might choose violet, bergamot, or something labelled spring morning that smelled worryingly like furniture polish. The scent needed to be potent enough to conceal reality, but subtle enough to avoid announcing your arrival before you turned the corner. Nobody wanted to be accused of using their handkerchief to launch a chemical attack. The necessity was constant. Step outside, and you were immediately assaulted by a symphony of smells. Sour milk, fishmonger stalls, the powerful scent of unwashed humanity, and, if you were truly unlucky, the contents of last night's chamber pots being flung from an upper-story window. You'd attempt to breathe through your mouth, but sooner or later the perfumed handkerchief was pressed almost tenderly against your nose. A deep breath, and for one brief, amazing moment, you were transported to a world of distant flower gardens and clean laundry. It wasn't just for the streets. The handkerchief came out in jammed omnibuses, at the market, in public bathhouses, and most importantly at the hospital or the home of a particularly smelly relative. Its presence was as comforting as it was essential. Victorian manners even permitted the strategic use of the handkerchief in company, a soft dab to the nose, a polite cough into the fabric, a knowing glance shared with other sufferers. The message was unmistakable. I recognise the problem, but I refuse to let it spoil my day or my dinner. For the fashionable class, handkerchiefs were a status symbol. They were monogrammed, embroidered, and carefully matched to one's outfit. The truly devoted carried a selection, one for display, one for fragrance, and one tucked away for actual nasal emergencies. Children were sent to school with a pocketful, though by afternoon the fragrant elegance was lost to mud and unidentifiable stains. Manufacturers quickly capitalized on the trend, producing scented sachets and advertising fragrant handkerchiefs as the newest defense against cholera, influenza, and the overall anxiety of Victorian city life. Advertisements promised miraculous effects, protection from bad airs, improved mood, and even success in romance, provided you chose the right scent. It was a rare time when style, public health, and self-care all converged. Still, the limitations were clear. No amount of bergamot could truly withstand the full force of a London street in August, or the airless confines of a packed theatre. There came a point in every Victorian's day when you simply accepted defeat, lowered the handkerchief, and pushed through, knowing you did your best to hold the line. At the end of the day, your handkerchief was less a mere piece of cloth and more a badge of courage. Frayed, faded, but still faintly fragrant, it declared to the world, "I survived, I inhaled, I endured." And as you laid it out to air for tomorrow's battles, you found comfort in those small victories. In a world ruled by terrible smells, sometimes all you needed was a small square of fabric and a glimmer of hope. Bathing was a shared experience, but not in a delightful, friendly spa day kind of way. The entire household queued up for the weekly tub, and by the time you got your turn, the water was less like a refreshing spring and more like lukewarm Victorian human soup. If you were last in line, congratulations. You were probably dirtier than when you started. The ceremony began with the arduous task of moving the bathtub, usually a dented copper or tin vessel that spent most of the week doubling as a laundry basket, a storage chest, or in a pinch, a cradle for the cat. It was dragged into the kitchen or near the fireplace, as that was the warmest spot in a home designed to let heat escape as quickly as possible. Buckets of water were fetched with weary resolve, each sloshing, chilling trip a reminder of how scarce every drop was. If you were fortunate, the fire had been burning all day and the water was just barely tepid. If not, you were already regretting your turn before you even began. First in line got the cleanest soak, usually the main wage earner, the oldest child, or whoever won the weekly arm wrestling contest. This lucky person sank into the steaming water with a deep sigh that echoed around the kitchen. Soap was carefully rationed, just enough to create a few bubbles and maintain the illusion of freshness. There was a quick scrub, a splash, and then out you went. If you were feeling charitable, you might leave a few remaining suds for the next person. The second in line was still mostly a genuine attempt at cleanliness, but a noticeable change had occurred. The water had cooled significantly, and its clarity was now comparable to vintage lemonade. Hair, dirt, and soap scum gently swirled on the surface like the world's least appealing garnish. By the time the children got their chance, the bath had become a suspicious greyish broth, a concoction of yesterday's coal dust, the week's sweat, and the general frustration of having siblings. Each successive bather tried to ignore what was floating in the water, but every so often something would brush against a knee that was definitely not your own. Etiquette demanded you ignore it just as you would an awkward comment at the dinner table. A quick, efficient wash was the only objective. You weren't aiming for spotless, just significantly less dirty than before. Faces were wiped, armpits were swabbed, and everyone was sternly warned not to take a drink of the water. As the water cooled and the line grew longer, bath night devolved into a spectator event. Siblings taunted, parents issued threats, and the cat watched in abject horror. The final bather faced the ultimate reality of bathwater roulette. The water was now a thick, murky stew, lukewarm and flavoured with the ghosts of baths past. There wasn't much point in using soap anymore. The sole goal was to get in, get damp, and get out before you caught a chill or completely lost your nerve. Sometimes, by the last person's turn, you were convinced you would have been cleaner, just sitting by the fire and hoping for a stiff breeze. After the last person had braved the water, the tub was emptied, sometimes out the back door, sometimes into the garden, and sometimes straight onto the street, where it would join everyone else's bathwater and the city's other liquid misfortunes. The tub was, theoretically, wiped clean, dried and returned to its daytime purpose. Towels, if you owned one, were shared, and everyone was rushed off to bed with the faint hope that maybe, just maybe, next week they'd be first in line. Bathwater roulette wasn't merely about hygiene. It was about family dynamics, the pecking order, and learning to value small victories, like finding a section of the tub that was still warm or a piece of soap that hadn't completely dissolved. It was a lesson in toughness, ingenuity, and the enduring dream that one day, somehow, everyone would get their own fresh bath. Right now, you're just getting by. You swish and spit, trying hard to keep your lips sealed. Floss? Don't even think about it. After finishing a heavy plate of chilled mutton and suet pudding, you search for whatever can pass as a toothpick, maybe a sharpened goose feather, a small piece of wood, or, if you've truly made it, a silver pick kept for special times. Good manners mean you must hide your mouth with one hand while you dig, poke, and act like you're not fighting for your dental life. The Victorian dining experience is a test of both your stomach and your poise. The food is dense, hearty, and often a challenge. We're talking tough meat and bread that would make a modern jaw ache. Once the dishes are gone and the sweet courses are cleared, the real work begins. You reach for your pick, stored in a small glass, or, for the well-off, a velvet-lined box on the edge of the sideboard. Toothpicks are daily essentials, treated with the same respect as high-quality silverware, but used with a subtle grace that's more a social ritual than basic cleaning. For the average family, the picks are made from whatever's handy, splinters from the firewood, a whittled-down match, or a small birch twig from the yard. The truly prepared keep a cache of goose quills neatly clipped and pointed, ready for duty. For the elite, only sterling silver will do, often monogrammed, always a bit showy and painstakingly shined by a tired house servant. A fine silver pick isn't just a tool, it's a conversation starter and a sign of wealth. Flash it at the right moment and everyone knows you're serious, especially about the roast beef that's been caught in your molars since the first course. Execution is key. Victorian etiquette demands you never show your teeth or go after a chunk of food like a gold miner. Instead, you discreetly cover your mouth with a hand, lean slightly from the table, and manage your operation with the cool confidence of someone performing minor surgery. Children watch and try to copy their parents, usually failing spectacularly. Many a family meal concludes with a scolded child, and a bit of mutton launched across the room. Post-dinner talk continues naturally, but everyone is half-focused on their own gumline struggle. There's a silent rivalry. Who can successfully remove the most difficult piece of gristle, the last speck of dessert, or the mysterious object wedged between their molars? Success is met with a quiet sigh of relief. Failure means you'll be irritated and distracted for the next hour. Sometimes, someone quits and secretly uses the edge of a playing card or the tip of a hairpin. Desperation breeds innovation, and dental discomfort is a powerful driver. Public settings demand even greater skill. In restaurants, inns, or at the theatre, the truly refined Victorian can carry out a post-meal dental rescue with an air of sophisticated detachment. A handkerchief might be used, or a gentle cough to cover any particularly intense scraping. The manners guides insist you must never, under any circumstance, make a show of your toothpicking. It's a private matter to be handled with class and very little noise. Sometimes a pick is more than just a pick. For the creative type, it's a hairpin, a tiny knitting needle, or the world's smallest weapon. Some clever entrepreneurs sell miracle toothpicks coated with mint or charcoal, claiming they'll whiten teeth, freshen breath, and maybe even cure a cold. Most are just splinters in fancy wrappers, but who cares? Hope is a huge part of the fight. As the meal ends, with your teeth mostly clean and your dignity somewhat preserved, you put your toothpick back in its container. Or, like most Victorians, you just tuck it behind your ear for later. After all, tomorrow brings another meal, another battle with heavy Victorian fare, and another round of the toothpick dance. So next time you sigh over the work of flossing, remember your ancestors who waged the good fight with a small stick, a prayer, and the art of polite hiding. Dental survival. It's what you had for dessert. Even the strongest perfumes can't win against the overwhelming presence of coal smoke and street filth. Some resourceful Victorians rub charcoal under their arms, in their shoes, or even inside their hats, desperate to soak up unwanted smells. The result? You end up smelling like a bonfire having a hint of lavender. If Victorian London had a signature aroma, it would be a swirling mix of coal smoke, horse manure, wet wool, and the occasional brave spritz of something floral. Everyone has a defence strategy. The hopeful drench themselves in cologne and rose water, trying to hold back reality for an hour or so. But the real innovator, the true survivor, turns to charcoal, that old miracle material that promises to absorb odours and, with any luck, most memories of the day. Charcoal, it turns out, is everywhere. If you're poor, it's what's left from the kitchen fire. If you're wealthy, it comes in a paper-wrapped box from the chemist's shop, promising a fragrant shield against every kind of city stink. The concept is simple. Charcoal soaks up bad smells like a sponge. The application, however, is a bit of a performance. A small bit under each arm, a sprinkle in your shoes, a dusting in your hatband for really bad situations, like after a visit to the tannery or a close call with a sewage cart. A little powder is even tucked into pockets and sewn into your coat lining. If you're not careful, you leave smudges everywhere you go, staining seats and shaking hands like a sooty spectre. But the perfume industry doesn't quit easily. Victorian chemists produce colognes in every scent you could imagine. Lavender, rose, sandalwood, bergamot, even eau de bouquet for those who prefer their flower notes with a bit of intrigue. These are not weak fragrances. They are strong, aggressive, and committed to overpowering coal smoke. The wealthy compete to see who can apply the most layers of scent without making anyone faint. The poor manage with a single precious bottle, making it last drop by careful drop, often saved for Sunday church, or the rare instance of having guests over. Of course, when cologne and charcoal mix, the effect is unforgettable. You drift down the street, leaving a trail of conflicting smells, smoky, sweet, and slightly alarming. Strangers wrinkle their noses, trying to guess if you've just left a fire or a flower show. Friends pretend not to notice that your handshake leaves a suspicious dust on their palm. For every person who claims charcoal absorbs all foul air, there's another who swears it just creates a new type of problem. Still, it's hard to blame anyone for trying. The alternative is giving up to the full olfactory assault of Victorian London. Homes are heated and lit by coal, so even when you're cleanest, a thin layer of soot settles on every surface and bit of skin. Walk down a main street and the world hits you with a wall of smell. Fried fish, unwashed people, horse droppings, and that mysterious river stench that no amount of lavender can defeat. Charcoal and cologne are the great equalisers, a way for both the banker and the bootblack to fight back against their environment. They stand for hope, resourcefulness, and a refusal to accept that smelling like a damp chimney is your fate. And so, every morning, you get ready for the day's struggle. A dab of perfume on the wrists, a dusting of charcoal in the shoes, and out you go, smelling faintly of both a garden and a blacksmith's shop. At the end of the day, your clothes hold the history of every step, handshake, and near miss with a passing cart. But as you hang your coat and brush off the final specks of black powder, you know you did your best. Maybe you smell a little strange. Maybe you've invented a new fragrance. Smoky floral resilience. In Victorian London, that's practically a badge of honour. Soap is so valuable, it's practically money. On lean weeks, people make do with oatmeal, ash, sand, or whatever rough substance is available. Washing up becomes less about getting clean and more about removing a layer of skin and developing an intense relationship with the nearest aloe plant. For most Victorians, a bar of soap isn't just a necessity, it's an item of desire, something to be measured out, hidden from greedy kids and brought out only for the rarest occasions, like an unexpected visit from the local priest or the once-in-a-lifetime bath before Christmas dinner. The average family's bar is shaved, scraped, and reshaped into strange lumps when it gets too small to hold. If you're caught using too much, prepare for a lecture, or worse, being sentenced to dry scrubbing for the near future. And so, necessity is the mother of invention. With soap scarce, you check your kitchen, your garden, and your trash for ideas. Oatmeal, usually reserved for breakfast and soothing babies, becomes a popular, if messy, scrub. Mix it with hot water, put it on your skin, and tell yourself you're at a fancy spa instead of just covered in your own porridge. The results are mixed, but at least you smell wholesome, like a biscuit that's given up on life. If you want something gritty, there's ash, straight from the fireplace and found in every home. Ash is mixed into water to create a thin grey paste, which Victorians promise will pull out impurities. In reality, it also removes moisture, self-respect, and the last of your natural skin oils. Still, it's great at removing dirt. After a solid ash scrub, you'll be so clean, even your soul squeaks. Sand is another favourite, especially if you live near the shore or, failing that, near an easy-to-access building site. A handful of damp sand quickly gets rid of stubborn grime, especially on hands and feet. The only problem? It's basically sandpaper. And after a few washes, you might discover you've lost your calluses and a few fingerprints. But as any Victorian will tell you, smooth skin is a small price to pay for not smelling like yesterday's soup. There's always the last resort, vigorous rubbing. Sometimes a cloth dipped in water and sheer willpower is all you have. The act itself becomes half cleaning, half workout, a visible show of effort, even if it's not actually effective. On a good day, a bit of lemon peel or a sprig of rosemary finds its way into the mix, adding a note of hopeful freshness to the usual smell of defeat. Children, as always, are the test subjects for all these new ideas. A mother's fury upon finding her last bit of soap missing is legendary, and pity the child who took it for a mud pie experiment. If the cupboards are empty, little ones are sent to the nearest stream or pump with orders to get clean or get creative. Many a child comes home with pink raw skin, claiming victory over dirt while secretly hiding a new rash. Some enterprising Victorians invent recipes for homemade cleaning mixtures, mashed peas, cold tea, potato peels, and anything even slightly abrasive. Newspaper columns are full of household tips, some sensible, most overly optimistic. One popular one suggests rubbing your hands with a raw potato and imagining yourself refreshed. Another, mix bran with rainwater for a gentle face polish. Desperate times call for desperate scrubbing. At the end of the day, true cleanliness is as much about the intention as the result. You scrub, scrape, and hope for the best, finding comfort in the fact that everyone else is fighting the same losing fight. In a city where even the river needed a good washing, being mostly clean is a sign of distinction. If your skin is glowing mostly from being rubbed raw, so be it. So next time you complain about running out of body wash, remember the Victorians, a people so determined they turned porridge, gravel and fireplace remnants into tools of hygiene and emerged, if not sparkling, then at least slightly less dirty than the day before. So tonight, as you sink deeper into your soft bed, surrounded by the gentle hum of modern life, and the comforting knowledge that your bathwater hasn't been used by your entire family, save a quiet thought for our Victorian friends. After all, they lived through a time when hygiene was mostly a myth. Baths were rare acts of bravery, and the daily challenge wasn't, "Will I feel clean today?" but, Will the coal smoke or the chamber pot fumes win the battle for control of my living room? They pushed through with a stubborn spirit, an arsenal of handkerchiefs, and enough scented water to perfume half of London. Their resilience was legendary, not because they enjoyed hardship, but because there was no other way. People found small moments of joy, like the satisfaction of a new bar of soap or the thrill of being the first to use the tub. They made it through each day one toothpick and one shared wash basin at a time. So, if you're dozing off now, wrapped in fresh sheets, and maybe thinking about tomorrow's shower, remember, you've already defeated most of the daily struggles of Victorian England. Your toothpaste tastes like mint, your socks are dry, and your next bath won't need a coal delivery or the patience of a saint. History might be messy, inconvenient, and a little scary, but it's also proof that people are adaptable, stubborn, and frankly funny in the face of struggle. So give yourself a moment of thanks for all the comforts you have, and perhaps whisper a thank you to the laundry machine, the flush toilet, and the miracle of indoor plumbing. May your dreams tonight be fragrant, your blankets cosy, and your worries as fleeting as a Victorian's bar of soap. Good night.